Welcome to the Weekly Pivot, August 17th, 2025. So here's what we're going to discuss. We'll talk about last week in review. We'll talk about upcoming events. It's kind of an interesting week. Review our SPX seasonality, which we've been doing regularly each week, and then we'll talk about some charts. So let's look at last week. We've been expecting choppy waters for August. We saw a little bit of expansion this week and then some consolidation towards the end of the week into OPEX. Slow grind up for all-time high. We did get the potential breakout that we were looking for on Tuesday with the CPI data coming in. Our daily inverse head and shoulders that we've been talking about since back in April is almost at the 6,500 low-end target. We've been reviewing that every week, so that's good. And then, of course, we tapped the swing golden gate, which we talked about last week, which unlocks, move to 6,550 by end of month. And we had already unlocked the position golden gate, and that's still in play up to 6,550 by end of quarter. So we're on the right side of things last week. We did anticipate that there could possibly always be a pullback, but we never got it. We got the slow grind that we were looking for. We talked about strength in the market, Google, Tesla, Meta, and a couple of other names that were doing pretty well. Apple. So far, so good. So kind of a big thing going on this week. It's probably the talk of all of social media right now is Jackson Hole Symposium, which is Wednesday through Friday. And of course that ends with a Fed Chair Powell talk. So that's going to be interesting. We do have FOMC meeting minutes on Wednesday. That'll give insights into what people are thinking. And I know there was some dissent on not lowering rates. So it'll be interesting to see what the notes are on that. Other than that, kind of just the usual suspects for this week. I think the big thing is Jackson Hole. Obviously, the minutes will help kind of clarify some stuff. But, I think all eyes are going to be on Jackson Hole and likely Fed Chair Powell by the end of the week. So it could be a little bit more of a consolidating week. We'll see what happens. I'm not expecting a ton of volatility until maybe kind of midweek, later week. So here's our SPX seasonality, kind of in line. Nothing's really different here. It's been kind of a choppy August. We've had down early in the month, and then we sort of did a little bit of grind up, and then a push and a break above all-time highs this last week, but kind of sticking in with the normal sort of pattern of August. Sometimes up a little bit, sometimes down a little bit. Definitely a little bit more grindy. September gets a little bit more interesting, and of course we can address that when we get closer to it. So let's talk about charts. On the left, I've got our usual suspects here. I've got our long-term levels, long-term ATR levels with the daily chart, and then I've got a clean weekly chart here. I've got our daily IHS plotted out here. So we've been talking about this now for a few months. And our target was 6,500 at the low end. Almost got there last week, almost within 19 points. So for all intents and purposes, the measured move of this IHS is roughly done. Expectation is it could go 6,500 to 6,800. I think that's not unreasonable. We'll see what happens. That may not be a straight line like we've seen so far for the most part. We've had these pullbacks to the 21, and this was the recovery of the 21. That's been really strong. That's a strong trend. When you get these pullbacks to the daily 21 and then you get breakouts, it doesn't get much stronger than that. That being said, we've moved a lot, and certainly pullbacks I think would be welcome at this point for anybody who's looking to get a little bit more value. And we'll continue to look for that. This breakout of all-time highs around 30. I think it was 27. Certainly some consolidation here just above that over the last 3 days. So we did get the bullish expansion. We were looking at compression last week. We did get a little bit of bullish expansion with the breakout. And we're kind of approaching the long-term 1 ATR, which is 65.1731. So, I'd go with the trend until it stops working. If we do get a breakdown of this prior all-time high 27, then a retest of daily EMA is not unwelcome. I think that would be a welcome pullback, and I think that's likely going to be a buyable dip unless things start to break down the 21. You can see the weekly breakout here. Talked about this a couple weeks ago that this could be a kind of a weaker pullback signal, and that's basically what we got. we're in the distribution zone. So certainly you can, get a bigger pullback. We really need a weekly pullback at some point, but we can definitely go higher before that happens. So don't get too overly crazy with the bearishness until we actually start to see some of these levels break down. So let's zoom in a little bit. On the right, I've got a daily chart with the position levels. These are quarterly levels. And then on the left, I've got an hourly chart. Normally, we've been doing 4 hour, but we're going to zoom in a little bit here with an hourly chart. This is actually one of my favorite chart setups, and I use it regularly throughout the day, particularly for swings. I love looking at this. So this is hourly candles, daily ribbon, and swing levels. But let's take a look at this. So, this zone right here, the 64.40, 64.50 has been strong demand for us over the last week. I would watch that. That's an important zone. If we lose that, likelihood that we're going to test this prior all-time high and potentially dip into the daily ribbon, I think is pretty high. So watch that. Very important support area. We've been consolidating the last 3 days. Definitely some nice day trading in here. Kind of a little bit choppy in some periods, but certainly some decent moves that we traded last week. So that's kind of what I'm looking at, this 40-50 zone. Obviously 80 has been resistance. We've got 6,500 above. We did tap the swing golden gate, so that does technically unlock us up to 65.50, 65.60 by the end of the month. High probability that can happen. Of course, we have over here on the right hand side, we had unlocked the position golden gate, which gets us roughly to the same zone by the end of the quarter. We do have some hourly compression here, and of course that makes sense because we are in this consolidation range between 40 and 80. We might stay in this range, or even if we break it, we may consolidate a little bit more this week until we start to see some insights from Jackson Hole and from the minutes. So something to watch for. But that's kind of what I'm looking at. 40-50 on the downside, 80 on the upside. Break of that, looking for a prior all-time high test, or a breakdown to to the ribbon 6,400, somewhere around there. And then if we break out 6,500, 65.17 will get us to the yearly 1 ATR, and then of course we've got levels above that, 65.50, etc. So that's kind of what I'm looking at for this week, and it should be kind of an interesting week. Lots going on in terms of the Jackson Hole stuff and Fed Chair Powell. And so that's probably going to have an outsized influence on how things proceed in the next couple days. All right. And that's your weekly pivot, August 17th, 2025. I will see you in the next one.